Welcome, everyone. I am Susan Myers, Executive Director of the Southwest Jewish Congress. Thank you for joining us. This is our second program on a serious subject, climate change. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you when it is ready for viewing. You will find the link to register to view the first program on our website at SWJC.org. During our webinar tonight, you can make comments and ask questions through the chat and Q&A functions. Okay. They're not on? Yes, they are.
Lynn, you're on. You're showing. There you go.
Yeah, I couldn't get it to turn off. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start again. Welcome, everyone. I am Susan Myers, Executive Director of the Southwest Jewish Congress. Thank you for joining us. This is our second program on a serious subject, climate change. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you when it is ready for viewing. You can find the link to view the first program that we had on our website at swjc.org. During our webinar tonight, you can make comments and ask questions through the chat and Q&A functions. You should find these icons at the bottom of the screen if you're on a computer, and if you're on a mobile device, they may be at the top of your screen. Following our speakers' presentations, we will have time for Q&A. Again, please enter your questions in the Q&A function. Also, we ask that you keep yourself muted and your video off during the webinar. Thank you. Now, I would like to turn the program over to Rosie Stromberg, SWJC Vice President. Rosie.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Just a few quick words about Southwest Jewish Congress. We are an 11-year-old nonprofit membership organization that welcomes diversity and is open to all. We build bridges throughout the community. We join with other nonprofits and universities to provide free educational programs. In early 2020, we held 2 in-person events before COVID-19 hit. And since then, we have presented all our other programs via Zoom. In addition to educational offerings, we began a humanitarian project called SWJC, Feeding Heroes and Neighbors in Need. So far, we have delivered over 5,000 meals to first responders and neighbors at more than 80 locations around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Every dollar raised has gone directly to the project through a separate fund. If you wish to donate, please check out our website, swjc.org, or you may send checks directly to SWJC. You can contact Susan Myers, you just met, after the program for more information. But now it's time to talk about what is pressing our hearts and minds today. That is the impact of climate change. It recently has been manifesting itself all around us in the form of extreme weather incidents. We've all lived through those recently. But there is so much more that we cannot see. And more important, we need to know about fixing things for the future, for our next generation. Each of our speakers will talk about approximately 18 minutes, followed by Q&A. And here to begin our conversation is our first presenter, Aaron Lehr. He is a senior at the University of Vermont, majoring in environmental studies. His special interest is the issue of sustainability. He has worked on Manumet, a Maine nonprofit organization, to assist small businesses in understanding the link between sustainability, and business. He has studied climate change and the change mitigation in Costa Rica. His immediate plan after graduation is to work in a psychiatric hospital in New York to relate patient care to hospital upkeep. But you can find more and read more about Mr. Lehr's biography by checking the Southwest Jewish Congress website. So now it's my pleasure to bring to you Aaron Lehr. Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Rosie. I really appreciate that lovely little intro. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So, well, I am absolutely honored to have been invited to talk about climate change with y'all this evening, because I feel like climate change is one of the most pertinent threats to us humans, as well as the environment today. And it's not nearly talked about or acted on.
Aaron, your slideshow is not up. Your script is up.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You're good. There you
Accurate?
go.
Okay,
Yes, that's
sorry
good.
about that. All right, so I'll just take it from where I left off. The more that we discuss these topics, connect with one another, and spread information, the better informed and prepared we'll be to deal with the climate crisis as it continues to unfold. So today I'll be discussing some of the impacts of climate change that are most worrisome to me. And before I get into that, I'd like to start with a quote from Emmett's The Emergence of the Environmental Humanities. On the basis of the scientific evidence, we think global warming is taking place and do not think it is an open question as to whether human beings have contributed to it or not. We believe that species extinction is occurring at an alarming rate, and we reject the notion that humanity has a special place in creation that legitimizes the elimination of other forms of life. We believe that current consumption of the Earth's resources is not sustainable. The seas are overfished, the air is increasingly polluted, the oceans contain vast floating islands of plastic, and the amount of garbage produced by human consumption grows year by year. We think that scientists excel at identifying and explaining such problems, but they alone cannot solve them. Solutions will require political and cultural expertise as well. It is not a scientific problem, but an interdisciplinary one. So without further ado, my first climate concern has to do with loss of biodiversity. So biodiversity is the variety of living organisms in a habitat, ecosystem, or the world. And the loss of biodiversity has to do with the rapid rate at which species are dying off around the planet. Now, while the species dying isn't necessarily a driver of climate change is expected to expedite the already rapid die-off of the Earth's diverse inhabitants, thereby continuing this feedback loop of biodiversity loss. So as climate and habitats change, the species that once were suited to live in a place might no longer be able to survive there. Some local Texas species being affected in this way that I know of are the Houston toad, whooping cranes, and Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. Now, in other cases, a species range might actually increase because the conditions become more favorable. Now, unfortunately, the most relevant examples of that I can think of are like super nuisances like ticks and mosquitoes. So a species might respond favorably or unfavorably to the changing climate and landscape, but what's this mean for us? Well, one of the ways that we can measure the effects of biodiversity loss on humans is by tracking ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the many and varied benefits to humans provided by the natural environment and from healthy ecosystems. They include provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. A provisioning service is any type of benefit to people that can be extracted from nature, such as food, water, oil, timber, etc. Cultural services are the non-material benefits we get from nature, like aesthetics, recreation, cultural development, and spirituality. Regulating services are the benefits that come from the regulation of an ecosystem. So those include things like plants filtering the air and water, bees and other pollinators consistently pollinating plants, bacteria and detritivores decomposing dead matter, and plants being responsible for soil retention. Last, but certainly not least, is supporting services. So supporting services are those that allow for all of the other ecosystem services to exist. And they include underlying processes like photosynthesis, nutrient cycling, the creation of soils, and the water cycle. I think that a great disconnect has developed over the years and been instilled in most of us. Often we like to think of ourselves as apart from the natural world, but in reality, we are a part of the natural world, and everything we do operates within the finite bounds of what it can sustain. These sustaining amenities are the ecosystem services. Unfortunately, I think that this influences a lot of folks to operate under the assumption that infinite growth is possible through exploitation of infinite resources. The graph to the left caters to these ideas, these concepts as being separate. But in reality, it's more like the graph on the right, the sphere of environment encompassing society and economy. Now, while biodiversity loss primarily threatens the species that are directly involved, we humans are inextricably reliant on the ecosystem services that sustain us. While ecosystems continue to face the consequences of climate and human-made change, many of the services that we rely on most are coming under threat. As wildfires rage, landscapes burn, and their inhabitants must leave or perish. The trees that once covered the hillside are no longer present to retain the soil. The soil slithers away, causing landslides, leaving little to no viable soil for plants to return to. A lack of plants might mean that fewer animals can survive on the land, all of which would result in a battered, temporarily unproductive ecosystem. While this hypothetical isn't about any
Aaron?
particular, yes?
Excuse me just a minute. Could you bring your microphone closer to your mouth, please?
Absolutely, is this better?
Yes, closer you could get. So you're
Sure,
there.
okay.
Thank you so much. Thank
Gotcha.
you.
So while this hypothetical isn't necessarily about any particular place, these consequences are playing out across ecosystems across the planet. So my next climate concern has to do with intensified and unpredictable weather. On screen here is a graph made up by National Geographic from 2015 about the increasing number of climatological, hydrological, and meteorological events over the years. And as we can see, the years have not been kind. And as climate change progresses, more and more intense and unpredictable weather and storms will continue to affect increasingly vulnerable areas. Now, unfortunately, Texas has been slammed on many occasions in recent years, and obviously over the past few weeks. But while it's impossible to ignore when it's happening to us in our own backyards, we must remember that these problems are affecting people all over the world, and for the most part, we're vastly unprepared. And since it's so relevant right now, under this category, I'll start with talking about the cold. So 10 years ago, I feel like it was pretty commonplace for me to hear that global warming couldn't possibly be happening because it was so darn cold in the winter. And maybe this winter was even colder than the last. So that must be proof that it's all a hoax, right? Well, I'd just like to take a moment to claim the term climate change over global warming, because climate change implies more than just, uniform warming. That's misleading. And as long as people are using the term global warming as a justification for climate inaction, I remain displeased that it was ever used in the first place. But even though this global warming falsehood has been widely debunked, it can be confusing to see how climate change is enacting harsher winters. So I'll shed some brief insight with these graphs for y'all. Now, the polar vortex pictured in these graphs is a large area of low pressure and cold air surrounding the Earth's north and south poles. The term vortex refers to the counterclockwise flow of air that helps keep the colder air close to the poles. You can see that counterclockwise flow on the left globe. Now, often during the winter in the northern hemisphere, the polar vortex will become less stable and expand, sending cold Arctic air southward over the US and other land masses. That deviation from usual flow can be seen on the right globe. The next image shows how typical polar vortex activity can be disrupted when warmer land temperatures allow more heat to be transported into the Arctic stratosphere. When this happens, the warmer air displaces the colder Arctic air, and that colder air will get moved typically over Eurasia or North America. These cold snaps, as they're called, explain the inclement weather that y'all were experiencing a few weeks ago. And on top of that, since we're experiencing climate change, a warmer Earth makes sudden stratospheric warming events more likely and more frequent. So as climate change progresses, patterns of intensified winter storms and cold snaps will be cemented as commonplace. Now, next, I would like to talk about heat and fire. So fire has also gotten a lot of attention in the news in the past few years, so I'll keep it brief. This map from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration shows the projected increase in the number of very large fire weeks, which are weeks in which conditions are favorable to the occurrence of very large fires. And this is a projection map, so it's like 2040 to 2070. And right, as we know, the Western US has been battered by wildfires as a result of increasingly hot and dry conditions, in addition to poor forest management. If trends of the past decades are to continue, climate change is expected to both intensify fire-friendly weather conditions, as well as lengthen the season during which very large fires tend to spread. So it looks like we're gonna have to adapt to more increasing heat, charred land, and wildfire refugees. Conversely, some historically wet areas are going to get wetter. While the consequences of such don't seem nearly as dire as those of excess heat and drought, floods and landslides can prove seriously detrimental to human health, environmental health, and property. Now, next about weather has to do with storm surges. So a recent report done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change revealed that the ocean had absorbed more than 93% of the excess heat from greenhouse gas emissions since the 1970s. This graph here shows the change in ocean temperature between 1880 and now. As the oceans warm as a result of climate change, hurricanes are becoming more frequent and intense because they draw off the ocean's heat to form. As a result, coastal and island settlements such as Houston and Bangladesh are most vulnerable to these hurricanes and cyclones. Here we see some of those effects playing out in Houston, and a very similar scene in Bangladesh. So again, it's easy to see when they touch down in Houston, but we got to remember that developing nations are facing the brunt of the climate impacts that are rolling out today. Bangladesh and so many others have historically been disproportionately impacted by climate change, and they will continue to be. In the US, we shrug off the externalities of production, whether they be physical waste or greenhouse gas emissions, and we ignore these ramifications because the out of sight, out of mind mentality serves us best. These things don't just disappear, and that's becoming harder and harder to ignore. Next up is drought and aquifer depletion. So what we're seeing here is fairly recent drought data compiled by the NOAA. And based on this and my working knowledge of the region, I'm not necessarily overly concerned that my home state of New York will experience debilitating drought. But the American West and Midwest, as we know, has experienced intense spells of drought in the past decades, and scientists are arguing over the severity of the droughts to come. Now, along with the aforementioned rising temperatures, drought will continue the desertification process of the West and Midwest, contribute to heat-borne fire, and potentially decimate our food system. Other than the obvious issues of water insecurity for us, effects on our food system are particularly worrisome to me. So much of our food comes from drought-prone farms that are designed with little regard for what's the most ecologically and hydrologically productive. Large monocultures and big industrial farms can be problematic to local biodiversity, the water table, and the farmers themselves. These farms are going to have to figure out how to bring water to their operations as droughts worsen. When water stops falling from the sky, obviously groundwater becomes the next best option. Now, unfortunately, many aquifers in the West and Midwest have already been squeezed relatively dry without any time to meaningfully recharge from precipitation. Since the start of industrial scale water extraction from aquifers post-World War II-ish, many of our aquifers, including the prominent Midwest aquifer known as the Ogallala Aquifer, have been used up with little regard for sustainable use. Now, as the aquifers dwindle, scientists predict it could take thousands of years of regular water cycle activity before the aquifers are once again charged. Now, a few thousand years might be a mere blink of an eye in the grand scheme of Earth's 4 billion year existence. However, we don't really have the time for that. And side note, it's just bewildering to me to think about how much of an impact humans have had in such a relatively short amount of time. But anyway, as the water cycle continues to torture these regions, it's becoming evident that we've become overly reliant on withdrawing from our aquifers. I fear the worst for our food system, those involved in production, and those who rely on it, if the way we produce food remains the same as climate and landscapes change. So in a few months, I'll be graduating with my bachelor's, and it probably won't look like this, unfortunately. But I will not lie, these topics have drained me. In my first year, they warned us that these topics are very doom and gloom-esque, and oftentimes by the end of class, I'd be grasping for optimism. Now, I'd hate for y'all to leave this talk with dread in your bellies the same way I'm leaving UVM with $200,000 worth of dread in my belly. So I'm gonna tell y'all some ways that I think we can act and think to help. So before I do that though, here's a nice little optimistic quote again from Emmett. Humanity is a force capable of great creativity, energy, and industry. We are the first generation to have realized our responsibility, that of finding a safe operating space within planetary boundaries for the sake of future generations. Now I have my issues with this quote, but overall, it's hopeful. I like it. All right, so what do we do? Well, I have my criticisms of the government about how for decades they've allowed for environmental degradation and how they've taken such a relaxed approach to mitigating climate change. But if we're to have any faith in our government, vote in those with agendas that include genuine environmental stewardship. Now, I don't like to say that nothing else matters in the face of climate change, because frankly, everything matters. But climate change and environmental decline are the problems that underlie everything else. We need to remember that at this point in time, we dictate environmental health and vice versa. So please vote accordingly and amplify the voices of those vouching for environmental progress in other areas of life as well, because the environment is all encompassing. It doesn't just respond to governance per se. So before I go on with my suggestions, I need to stress that while we can take individual actions to help the situation, we need to hold the systems that perpetuate cultures of consumption, pollution, and disconnect from the environment accountable. Obviously, we're trying to change the course of climate change, but to do so, we need to change our governing, economic, and cultural systems. Despite the responsibility that larger systems have to do so, I think that we have to individually contribute to a shift in culture. This involves changing the way we think about our interactions with the environment, and I like to specify consumption. Degrowth is a concept developed by anti-consumerist thinkers who argue for downscaling production and stopping the overuse of resources. This movement challenges the common perception that growth is the measure of economic well-being. It says that development is a better measure of progress than growth. And broadly, this is the idea that we can make the things we already have better rather than needing to expand endlessly, because there is no such thing as endless growth. But on a more actionable front, I think that there's a lot we can do. So other than voting accordingly and uplifting voices, I think that we can repair what can be fixed. And I know that that sounds difficult and is difficult today when things are made intentionally poorly so that we've got to throw them out and buy more to benefit the corporations, but repair what can be fixed. Next is refuse the items that you don't need. So this is getting at just shifting towards a less materialistic culture. I'm certainly guilty of buying frivolous things and taking frivolous things, but it's just about trying to reevaluate. Reduce those you do. So again, getting at a less materialistic culture. Next is reuse what you can. So this can and should go beyond shopping bags. I feel like shopping bags are the poster boy for this. Single-use items are kind of preposterous, and our landfills could sing all day about them. I'm not a fan. Reuse what you can. Next is recycle what's left. So of the classic 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, this is the most famous, but I feel like it's the least important in terms of shifting culture, although I definitely do encourage that you recycle if you're able. Next is rot everything else, compost. So this is the idea that your organic scraps shouldn't go towards a landfill where they will contribute to methane emissions, they should be responsibly turned into soil in one way or another. And I know that a lot of places don't have the infrastructure for this, but it's spreading, it's getting more popular. And if there's no infrastructure, do it yourself, DIY. And lastly is weatherization. So I know that this was a huge issue for me up in Vermont during the winter, and I'm sure it was an issue down in Texas when it was freezing a couple weeks back, but weatherization of homes is key. Having homes and buildings sealed for the sake of energy efficiency is one way to lessen our impact on the environment, but as y'all experienced recently, it has greater implications for human health. Staying warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer at less of a financial and energy cost is a no-brainer. Along these lines, I feel like there are a lot of ways that we could make more efficient use of what we already have for the sake of ourselves, our wallets, and our planet. So I just want to thank y'all for listening to me tonight. I'm going to stop screen sharing, but I hope that I was able to inform a little bit about climate change and its impacts and give y'all some space to live better for yourselves and the planet. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Jane Lackman.
Okay, hi. Thank you, Aaron, for a very informative presentation. Now I want to introduce our second speaker. Dr. Susan Pacheco is a professor of pediatrics specialized in allergy and immunology at the University of Texas McGovern Medical School in the Texas Medical Center in Houston. She earned her medical degree at the University of Puerto Rico Medical School in San Juan and completed her pediatric residency at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship training in allergy and immunology and a clinical laboratory immunology fellowship both at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. Dr. Pacheco's area of expertise is in climate change and how children are impacted by the climate crisis. As part of her activities, she has been a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Executive Committee of the Council on Environmental Health, and co-authored the AAP's 2015 policy statement about climate change and children's health. Dr. Pacheco served as a child advocate and expert witness in constitutional climate lawsuits. Now we welcome Dr. Pacheco. Thank you.
Hello. My apologies, this is coming. Okay. Okay, I think we got it right. Good evening to all. First thing, I want to say thank you for your time and your patience and your attention. And second, I want you to meet my family. This is one of my favorite pictures that I usually keep to introduce my dogs, but today I'm going to introduce my children because it was those children who in 2006 took me to see the documentary An Inconvenient Truth. And I remember how I was reluctant to go. First, it was a weekday. Second, I had so many things to do. And third, I did not care much about what was going on about climate change. Long story short, we went. I needed to be a good mother because you know how it is. Kids will come back to hit you. And I remember sitting there. And when I started seeing the documentary, I was asking myself, you know, this is happening. And how could I ignore this for so long? And I credit myself. I've always thought that I am a good pediatrician and a good mother. And I could not believe that I had managed to ignore the climate crisis until then. And that was a life-changing experience. And that brings me to talk and share this information with you today. And I have to say that I struggle with how to convey the urgency that the climate crisis is. I think that this is the problem of the times. And if we don't do something, the world that our kids are going to inherit will be completely different than the one that we know today. So let's talk about Texas. What I want to do is to tell you briefly, and Aaron gave a very good background, so he's made my work easier. I'll share with you briefly how is the environment changing and why it's important. I also want to bring your attention that children are affected from very early, even before they're born. And maybe most importantly, what can we do? Because there's things that we can do to help the future generations. The information that I will share today, some comes from the 2019 report on the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, the National Climate Assessment Report from the US, and the report that came last year from Texas A&M, where there were the projections for the state up to 2036. So summarizing, this is what the Lancet Countdown says, that if we follow a business as usual pathway, the world will be, on average, will be 3 to 4 degrees hotter than what it is today for children by the time that they turn 71. Now, those of you that live in Texas and experienced the summer that we just had, I don't know, for me, it's hard to believe that we can live in such an environment. So I'm so sorry, going briefly over the US, and I don't have to say much about this. This is from the National Climate Assessment. We know that we'll have the rising temperatures. We know that we have the extreme precipitation, and we'll have the floods. Hurricanes, Texas is not a stranger to hurricanes. We'll have the increased sea level rise, and that will be very prominent in the east, west, and also in our coast. Cold waves and winter storms, and we've experienced some of that, droughts, wildfires, and heat waves. And I'm sure that all of us can relate to one of these events in the last few months or few years. Now, I want you to read about this, what we expect in Texas, because it's pretty sobering. And the one that it comes to my attention, again, talking about the heat, is that we will experience nearly double the days in the triple digits, meaning 100 degrees or higher by 2036. And we'll have the other events in terms of precipitation, storm surges, and hurricanes coming to our coasts. Now, let's talk about children. What happens to children? Many of us, when we talk about climate change, we think, okay, kids are going to get asthma, going to get allergies. But my job today is to tell you that it's more than that, because essentially every organ system is affected. So it's not that our kids will be sneezing more or maybe will have more asthma attacks, but it's also that their brain will be affected, their heart will be affected, their blood pressure will be affected, their kidneys, the growth, their genetic material will be affected. So basically, we are, and I'm going to say it this way, we are designing by choice a group of children that are impaired. And the reason why I say that is with our designing is because we are the ones that are driving climate change, and we are the ones that many times are choosing inaction. So another very important topic that I want to bring to your attention, and I apologize for this, is that the vulnerability varies according to this stage of life. So mothers and babies, infants and toddlers, and older children, they all have very different vulnerabilities. Now, if you think about this, there's a lot of vulnerability in the developing child at many stages. And the same with children, because they have, their brains are developing, their organs are developing, joints are developing, heart is developing, lungs are developing, so they're more susceptible to potential injuries. Now, the damage starts very early, and I want you to pay attention to this slide, Because what we don't know and what the majority of people in the US and around the world are not aware of is that the changes that are implemented or by climate change, like extreme weather events, heat waves, air pollutions, infections, malnutrition, and stress, and I want to underline the word stress, affect children in many ways. They affect the pregnancy outcomes, and you have them there. Children are more prone to malignancy, autistic spectrum disorder, changes in their genetic material that may be with them for generations, heart disease, infections, and atopic disease. And this is only because of exposure of the mother. Now, it gets much more complex for this reason. We know that children exposure of the mothers also can create some predispositions in the adults that you have there in the middle, like mood disorders or mental illness, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So this is on top of the pregnancy outcomes that I mentioned on the previous slide. And what is even more sobering is that these children are going to be the ones that will be facing the changing environment. So they have a disadvantage from the very beginning, even before they're born. So thinking about heat, and again, I'm not going to mention Texas a lot, but we're going to be experiencing heat waves across the US and in the world in general. We know that there'll be an increase in birth outcomes, and I put there prematurity and low birth weight. Why are these important? Because children that are premature children or children that have low birth weight, they are more prone to other medical problems as they grow and develop. And we just published a paper where it seems that these outcomes are worse in or more frequent in disadvantaged populations or minorities. We have higher morbidity for infants and children ages 0 to 4. And in the US, we know that over now 9,000 athletes in high schools have exertional heat illness every year because of the high temperatures. Now, I always like to bring this because, again, it's an issue of environmental justice. There's close to 500,000 children in the US between ages 12 and 17 that work in agriculture. And if you are not aware of this, there are no laws protecting these children. So they can work in agriculture and they are exposed and they have no type of protection. Heat, this problem is so overwhelming, again, because we know and that even slow exposures or brief exposures to heat during pregnancy increase the incidence of congenital heart disease. Now, this is, so we've seen significant increases in the congenital heart disease, but what's even more sobering is that with the projections that we have now, we will have thousands of cases of congenital heart disease in states, as you can see there, that will be exposed to more heat waves in a business as usual scenario. Now, in Texas, talking again about heat, we have over 300 live births a year. So you can imagine, and again, most of the population, even physicians, are not aware that this is the case. Wildfires, and Aaron shares some very important information about what we expect in terms of wildfires. And I want to say that over 7 million children in the US are affected by wildfire smoke annually in the states that you have there. And in the state of California in 2018, over 1 million children had classes canceled because of wildfire in the month of November. Extreme weather events, oh my goodness, we're not immune to this. And you know that those pictures are Texas. And, you know, I volunteered during Harvey in one of the big centers. And it was very unreal to see how families were there, children were sharing with complete strangers, adults, and their little possessions, whatever they were able to rescue, they were hiding under the cots where they were sleeping. And we go back again to Harvey by the millions, as by the numbers, and there were over 3 million children that were living in disaster declared counties, and over 1 million children that live in that were out of school for at least 1 week. Mentioning air pollution, as I shared before, it's not only the asthma and the allergic rhinitis, even though those are very important. We know that over 90% of the children of the world are exposed to air pollution. And again, it's not only a atopic disease that is relevant, but there's at least 7 million children in the US that have asthma. 7% of the population of children in Texas or close to 500,000 suffer from asthma. And so you can see there's many of our counties that are in the top, or cities that are in the top worst 25 according to the American Lung Association. Now, the damage in terms of allergies, asthma, and eczema starts very early, depending on when was the mother exposed to these pollutants. But it's not only the lungs. I think that this is one of the issues that bothers me the most. And these are studies that have been seen in children that have grown in mega cities like Mexico cities. And when people look at the brains of these kids, there's evidence of neuroinflammation. There's evidence of the white matter of the brain that is critical for the thought process is thinner. And more tragic is that we have changes that we see in individuals with Parkinson's, pre-Parkinson's and pre-Alzheimer's. And we don't know what's going to happen with these populations. The incidence of leukemia also increases with exposure to air pollution, and incidence of infections like pneumonia, ear infections, or upper airway infections or colds. Now, I just have 2 or 3 minutes left, but I want to bring to your attention mental health, because if there's something that we really need to pay attention as we think about adaptation strategies, is mental health. Kids are very vulnerable, the same way that adults, well, not similar to adults, but in a different way, to the impacts of climate change when it comes to mental health. And I want you to think about this. We know that, and this is based on some studies, some population studies that started at Kaiser Permanente. We know that children that get exposed to adverse childhood experiences like violence or displacement, they are more prone to have, as when they turn into adults, depression, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and all of these diseases of older individuals or mature individuals. However, and there's a quote there that I want you to read. This is from a little 7 or 8 year old boy after Hurricane Maria, and this is what he says: "I lost all my things," and he says, "I'm worried, but not only about people, he's also worried about Puerto Rico." So, you wonder, does a child that age should be worrying about the well-being of the crowds? I think that is a very heavy load. And if we look at this is the type of exposure that our children are having. And if think about this, it's not only that the kids are exposed, but that there are adults that are impaired and are going to be struggling, and they are the ones that are going to be leading the rescue, emotional rescue, actually. I'm thinking about effort. And not only that, but kids are becoming aware that the planet is changing, and this can cause a lot of distress. So this is part of the future that our children will experience, and we need to think what is going to happen to them and what is our responsibility as healthy adults with resources in creating a future where children can thrive. The damage is at various levels, or the injuries. We have the direct consequences, like we have the natural disasters, but also the indirect consequences. We have population displacement, the food insecurity, air pollution, all of these things that result from the changing climate. Now, there are effects on physical health that I mentioned already. And one thing that we are seeing more and more, and we're becoming more concerned about, is this eco-anxiety. And because children are becoming aware that the environment is changing and they see how their future is compromised. So what do we do? I think that, we have the people that are here, all of us that are listening today, we are responsible and we can make a difference in the life of our children. And Aaron mentioned some very important points of things that we can do. I want to share with you that, yeah, there's change, and if there's strategies that we can do. And if you look here, coast collapse in the state of Texas, I think that this is comparison between 2010 and 2010. 2020, you see how the use of coal decreased dramatically and wind energy increased significantly. So there are things that we can do. And not only that, but at our own level, we can do. One thing that I do is I talk. And I always joke that I have become that person. When UT says, oh, somebody about climate, yeah, Dr. Pacheco, that's all she talks about. And you want to be that person. And we want to speak up and we want to educate ourselves, because most people don't know about this. And we need to educate our community and get people engaged so that we can make a change. Now, we need to build community to promote resilience. And we know that in the setting of adverse childhood events, we know studies, there's data that says that if kids have a support system, they can thrive. And all of us can do that. And having said that, I want to turn it to Lynn. I appreciate your time and your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco. Thank you for the presentation. Dr. Pacheco, if you and Aaron would both turn on your video and your sound, we'll start questions and answers. If anyone has questions, please put them into chat, or questions and answers, please. Dr. Pacheco, the first question we'll ask is, what is the correlation between COVID-19 and climate change?
Okay, you can see me now. Actually, that's a very good question, because there's a lot of confusion. And I think that it's important to state the facts where they are. We don't have any evidence that there's a correlation, or the reason why we have COVID-19 has anything to do with climate change. So that's very important, because we don't want to put those together. Now, the area of overlap is environmental justice, because the communities that are more vulnerable in the setting of climate change are the communities that are also being affected by COVID-19 infection.
Thank you. Thank you. Aaron, a question for you. What does it matter if a species goes extinct?
All right, so I like to think that any loss of species diminishes human culture on one note, but on another note, every species fills a niche in its ecosystem, and its niche is like its job, its spot. Some species occupy a lesser niche, and other species occupy greater niches, and those species that occupy greater niches are keystone species. Like in an archway, a keystone is, the stone that holds it together. It's a really important species in the ecosystem. And some that I can think of are beavers, bees. Bees are a huge one. The loss of bees could be huge for the food system, for ecosystems. I I don't even want to say that some species matter more than others, but some species have a greater impact. So the impacts can vary, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. Great answer. Dr. Pacheco, what are the effects of climate change on the elderly population that are expected due to the higher number of days over 100 degrees?
You know, I'm a pediatrician, right? No, no, but actually, you know, when you come to heat, the heat waves affect more the adult population than the pediatric population. And actually, if you go to 2003, there was a heat wave across Europe, and there was an excess of deaths. Over 70,000 people died, and most of them were older people. The number of children that died in that heat wave was very, very minor. The same happened with the Chicago heat wave in 1995. If you look at the news, you know, these were all of these elderly people that were the ones that were dying. And when we do interventions, you know, it's very easy to save people, just if we educate them and implement some very basic measures for protection. But it's more the elderly population than the pediatric population.
Okay, thank you. Aaron and Dr. Pacheco, I have read that there will be climate change migrants as people must move from their home countries that have become unlivable, such as the people living on islands in the Pacific that will be underwater soon. What can be done to help those who will be affected by climate change and must leave their homes?
Really good question. Well, this is, I think, an area that policy has a lot to do with it. Because, I mean, especially the places, island settlements, you know, Pacific Islands, otherwise Bangladesh, like those people are experiencing that right now. So there's not much that we can do necessarily to interfere with what's currently happening, but we need to provide asylum. I mean, that's easy to say for me, because I have no hands in it. I don't know the complexities that go with that. But there's a lot of space in the world, right? Very simplistically, provide asylum. I don't know. Dr. Pacheco, do you have anything to say about that?
I said yes and no. You know, that's a very complex problem, and there are islands already that are already moving their people, and they're looking for other places. Truth is that many of those places we will not be able to rescue, because it will take years, centuries for the planet to balance and go back. And as you said, Aaron, most of the heat goes to the sea level. But then at the same time, you know, we need to support policy, and we worked support programs like the Paris Agreement, because in the Paris Agreement, there is provision on how to protect those groups. And the other thing that we need to do is education. You know, it's our responsibility. We are the ones, and the countries that contribute the most in terms of greenhouse gases are the ones that are least affected. We know that, right? So it is our responsibility to rescue these places. Now, the other thing that is very important is create awareness. I was in the atolls in Panama, forgot, San Blas Islands, a few months ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, and most people in the population, they don't know that this is happening. So when I ask, they say, no, there's nothing here, and they're living their lives, and they're not aware that, you know, the reason why there are a bunch of palm trees inland is because of sea level rise. So, you know, we have a responsibility towards those populations of supporting them and also educating them so that they can adapt. The responsibility of mitigation should be ours, not theirs, because they add very little to the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Next one, because of poor air quality, some Asian countries have been wearing masks for years. One, is there proof the poor air quality has actually caused health problems? And two, is there proof that wearing masks have protected the citizens' health?
Well, I think I demonstrated that yes, poor quality is a big problem. Um, the issue that we have right now is that many of the masks that are available are not that protective. For example, if you wear an N95, that's great because 95% of the particles will be, will not get in through the mask in a good mask. But then if you wear one of these regular masks, it drops down to 10 or 20% protection. So you may filter the large particles, they will get stuck there, but you're not going to be protected. And the same with cloth face covers. Now, if that's all you have, that's all you do, right? I got a question maybe 2 or 3 years ago, somebody from California, what can we do to get the kids out? This is through the American Academy of Pediatrics on days of poor quality. And it was very sad because I said, there's nothing we can do. There's just nothing we can do. They won't be protected. But there's things that we can do to prevent in the future. And one of them is education.
Thank you. Next one, Dr. Pacheco, where can we get more information on negative environmental effects on newborns to high school children?
I'm sorry, newborns too?
Newborns up into high school children, the age between newborns and high school.
There's plenty of information. One place that is, and of course we have to be careful with what we read. I like to use a lot UNICEF because they have a lot of information about what happens in the pediatric population or children, actually it's United Nations children's site. The other one is the website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. There's plenty of information there, and I'll be happy to send some links later that we can share, Lynn, so that people have access to reliable information.
That would be great. If you could send that, we would appreciate it. Thank you. Next question, Aaron. Is climate change, wrong question. Does climate change affect the food chain?
Certainly, yeah. Like I said, especially with the food system we have in the U.S., it's a whole lot of big industrial farms. It's a lot of monocultures out West, Midwest. And like I said, those are the areas that are going to be hit the most. And I feel like there is the culture around food production is certainly not a sustainable one. And I think it's like maybe actually, I'm not even gonna, it's agriculture and livestock is one of the biggest contributors to emissions that contribute to climate change. So it's the feedback loop is immense. Like I think that a shift to not necessarily like victory gardens, but growing communal food, I think is key, because I don't know how to grow my own food. If the food system collapses, what am I going to do? I said, I'm most fearful for those who rely on the food system, but that's all of us, unless y'all grow your own food. I commend you if you do, but I don't. Sorry, that was like a long-winded something.
No, that was fine. That was fine. Next question, Dr. Pacheco, what is your opinion of geoengineering?
Somehow, and actually, I'm sure Aaron knows about this more than I do, right, Aaron? But we need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to move away from fossil fuels, whatever way we can to do that. We must do that. However, I was going to bring to the attention, adding more to the previous questions for Aaron, is that the nutritional value of foods is going to change with increasing temperatures, with increased CO2. So it's not only that there's going to be less, but it's that it's also going to be less nutritious. And that's something that we need to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. Our last question, probably for both of you. With the climate change increases in temperature, what are the expected changes in air humidity? Will that change the biome since mold, cockroach, rats, and mice and bed bugs are dependent on indoor air humidity being high?
Okay, yeah. So I know that warmer air can hold more water vapor, and so right off the bat, it's more humid. And additionally to this, water vapor is a greenhouse gas, so that's just gonna continue the feedback loop of that. But I know of an equation that can account for that. I am not even going to try to quote it at all, but with every degree Celsius that goes up, it's like 5, 6, 7% humidity increase. So again, I'm not like trying to like say it's exactly 5, 6, or 7%, but there's an equation that I know of that accounts for that. How that relates to like mold and all that stuff, I'm sure it's gonna be a boom for that type of stuff, but it's gonna be more humid.
Absolutely. You say both of us, right? And yes.
Sure, that'll be fine. And then one more question.
No, and that's very
so go ahead.
true.
No.
And it's very true. We have moist, all of these things thrive. You mentioned those bugs. I don't even want to repeat, but we are having one of the places where that applies a lot in terms of pests is the school system. And unfortunately, their quality and the moisture, and there are no regulations for when it comes to air quality in the school system. So these are definitely going to affect more. Places like Texas and Florida, we have a bunch of dust mites in the schools and in the houses, of course, and they thrive in moisture. You go to the Northeast and then you have the other bugs that I don't want to repeat. So definitely will have an impact in what's going on and the degree of exposure that we have.
Okay, thank you both for your presentations and your questions and answers. I'd like to turn it over to you both. Susan Pacheco, Dr. Pacheco, we'll start with you. Ladies first for closing comments, please. And then Aaron, you afterwards. Thank you.
Wow, what can I say? This is a moment, right? No, but I hope, there's three things that I said three because that's the name that just came to my mind, but that I want to bring to our attention. Number one, climate change is real, period. It's real and it's happening in the US, no matter what we think or the denial, whatever we say, it is happening and it's affecting us, adults, and our children and the future generations as we speak. And there are some changes that we cannot bring back now. Is it all dark and ugly? Absolutely not. Can we do something? You bet. We've been, there's many measures of adaptation that can be implemented, like in the setting of education, which is my field. And those of us that have the time and they are in a position of do so, we can promote policy so that we can protect the future generations from this. Is it doable? You bet. If it was not doable, if it were not doable, I wouldn't be here. So I want to invite us, and all of us, in whatever capacity that we can, to make a difference, because you will be making a difference for a child. And even just turning off one light, or writing a letter, or changing to renewables, or educating your community, it makes a difference, and every single effort counts. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Aaron?
Certainly. Okay, so I'm gonna echo Dr. Pacheco a little bit, but it's worth echoing. This is serious stuff. So If it wasn't clear before, I hope it's clear now. Climate change poses an extraordinary threat to human and environmental health. And like I said earlier, it's baffling the amount humans have done to the environment in such a short amount of time. But imagine what we can do going forward as a unified front. There isn't time for debate anymore. The way I see it, we could truly commit to this path of environmental degradation and continue with business as usual, or we could get with the times and get serious about lessening our impacts and reimagine the way we interact with our places and the earth. This problem is an interdisciplinary one. The solutions will not subscribe to the narrow ways at which we look at things through either a scientific, political, or artistic lens, for example. This means that the solutions we think up and enact have to stress cooperation. Cooperation among individuals, cooperation among governments, and cooperation among disciplines. Now, at this point, I am full of hope and a healthy amount of fear, but I would like to finish this by stressing my optimism. And just thank you. I'm really glad I was able to do this.
Thank you both for being with us and joining us. I'd like to turn the program over now to Rosie Stromberg.
Thank you, Lynn. And thanks to our speakers, Dr. Pacheco and Aaron Lehr, our host, Susan Meyer, and all of our viewers who spent their evening with us tonight. Now I want to mention two important things. First, that membership in Southwest Jewish Congress is open to all, and we invite you to join us as individuals, businesses, or corporations. Or you can contribute to our feeding project for first responders and neighbors, and you can do either of these by visiting the website at swjc.org, or our trustee, Susan Meyer, who will assist you as needed. Second, mark your calendar for our next program. It's on Wednesday, March 17 at 7 p.m. We will hear from retired Army Colonel Deb Lewis, who will talk on making, quote, stress your superpower, quote. As we close our time together, please think of yourselves as one of the problem solvers for our climate and our future. You individually can make a difference, and we hope you will. Thanks and good night.
Thank you.